Welcome back. So, I wanted to bring up a topic which I think is super interesting. I was talking to a friend of mine and he planted this thought in my head that is really interesting. What if the whole story is about Yehuda? We are led to believe that this entire story has to do with Yosef, that Joseph was sold into slavery, and then he went through this whole experience with Potiphar, and then he got in trouble there, and he went to prison for a bunch of years, and then he ended up being the second most powerful person that lived at that time. In the meantime, Yehuda fell out of grace. He fell from his high position of power with the brothers when the brothers saw that his advice was not such great advice, and their father was heartbroken and they blamed him. They said, you have such a, strong hold on us that you could have convinced us anyway. So why did you convince us this way that we should sell him? And now look at our father. You should have done something else. They had a scapegoat and they chose for it to be him. And as a result, he distanced from them. The Torah tells of how he went on his own path and went through some experiences. And so if we tie it all together and we just stop and we look at the whole situation, it's a very interesting picture. Yosef was always the favorite son. And I mean that literally, as in he was Yaakov's favorite son, but I also mean it in, he was the favorite son. He always had the attention, whether it was negative or positive, he was always in the limelight. First with his father, then when he went to Potiphar's house as a servant, even though he was a servant, but all eyes were on him, he was super successful, everything he touched turned to gold. And then when he fell out of grace with Potiphar and he went to prison, the prison made him his second in command and he gave him control over the prison, and everybody is so impressed by his abilities to interpret dreams. And then eventually he goes to Pharaoh, and he ends up being the second most powerful man in the most powerful country in the world. And then eventually his brothers come down and the whole story happens and he reveals himself and they all live happily ever after under his rule and his love and his taking care of them. So it makes for a great story and it's amazing, but at no point was he ever not the favorite son. He always had the attention. Everything was always about him. In contrast, Yehuda was not. Yehuda is someone who is almost spoken about in passing. He did this and he fell out of grace. And some of the commentators talk a little bit about how he fell out of grace with the brothers, and then he went into business with this other man from a different, not from the family, and he started business with him, and then he got into a relationship with this woman, and then eventually he comes back on the scene taking responsibility when this second in command person, who ends up being Yosef, as we know, tries to trick the younger brother, Binyamin, into becoming a servant, and he takes responsibility with his father. He says, don't worry, I'm going to get him back. And he even approaches Yosef before he knew who he was, and he whispered some pretty harsh things in his ears. But the point is that you see that his name starts appearing more and more in the Chumash, in the Bible, in the Torah, as the story comes to an end, full circle, where we discover that Yosef did become successful and all of his dreams actually happened as he claimed they would. But the thing is that the clear difference between Yosef and Yehuda is that Yosef was always getting attention and Yehuda was not. He was living the life of a righteous man, despite the fact that he was not, super successful at everything and everybody was all amazed by him and he was getting all the attention. And what I'm trying to get at is that it seems like the story of a child. When we are children, all eyes are on us. Our parents want us to behave, and our teachers want us to behave, and we need to follow all these social norms and everything. And then as we go through life, there's less and less. People pass away, people leave our little world. Whatever the case is, as we get older, we get to this eventual point, God willing, if we live a nice long age, where we're not that person where all eyes are on us, but just the opposite. We're a person that has to do the right thing because we know better. So in essence, Yosef is the story of a child, and Yehuda is the story of an aged, mature man who does things because he's supposed to and not because he's the favorite son. And I would say that since, as my rabbi always said, it's all about the end goal, it's all about winning in the end, shouldn't we be more focused on the story of Yehuda than Yosef? Yeah, Yosef is a great story to learn. It's the story of the history of the Jews, and it's great to know how it all evolved and what a righteous man he was. He was one of the greatest leaders that ever lived. But wouldn't it be more beneficial for our success to study Yehuda? Because Yehuda is the story of a man that did greatness without all eyes on him. And that's where we're going to get to one day, eventually, God willing, in our old age, is that we still want to persevere and do all the right things and be righteous, even as we know. I see it now. Yeah. I'm not an old man by a stretch, but I see that, the attention that you have as a child, you don't have when you get a little older. All eyes are not on you. Your parents are not alive anymore to tell you to behave. But as I said, as you get older, you want to get to that point where you do the right thing because it's the right thing to do. And I think it's worth it to give more interest and focus and take a look at the story of Yehuda. Thank you so much.